It's Friday, April the 12th. From The Economist in London, this is The Week Ahead, a look at some of the stories that will be in the headlines next week. I'm Daniel Franklin, Executive Editor at The Economist.
And I'm Tom Standage, the Digital Editor. In The Week Ahead, Margaret Thatcher's funeral is held in London. French politicians face a deadline to declare their assets. A presidential election is held in Venezuela. And in Amsterdam, the Rijksmuseum reopens. Daniel, let's start with Margaret Thatcher's funeral, which will be held on Wednesday next week. Obviously, it's going to be a great affair of state. What can we expect?
An affair of state, but not quite a state funeral. It's a ceremonial funeral, just short of a state funeral, but the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh will be attending. So you can expect huge crowds, a lot of global attention, great curiosity about who is there and who isn't there, and all of this surrounded by controversy given the polarising figure that she was during her political career.
And there are people who say that she ought to have an even higher status funeral. There are Tory MPs calling for this to be made a state funeral. At the same time, there are other people saying this is all much too much given how divisive and unpopular she was.
Yes, and it's not just over the funeral. There has been argument over whether, for example, at the weekend's football games in the Premier League there should be a minute's silence for Margaret Thatcher. Some think there should, others think there shouldn't be, and in fact it probably won't happen, and it probably wouldn't be very silent if they tried to hold it anyway. But I think that the funeral will be, no doubt about it, a grand affair. One person who won't be there is Mikhail Gorbachev, with whom Margaret Thatcher famously said she could do business. He is 82 and I think not well enough to come. Argentina's president, Cristina Fernandez, has not been invited. Margaret Thatcher, of course, went to war with Argentina over the Falklands. But there will be dignitaries, politicians from all over the world. So as is the wont of these funerals, they also become on the sidelines an opportunity for mini summits.
And I think it'll be interesting also to see the extent to which the crowds turn out, because you're very likely, I think, to see protests, people turning out to wave placards expressing disapproval of her alongside people expressing support for her. So it will be very interesting to see what the public mood on the streets is as well.
Across the channel in France, Tom, there's a deadline of April the 15th for elected officials to divulge their finances. And this is all in the wake of a big scandal that has claimed the head of the budget minister in François Hollande's government.
Yes, that's right. So Jérôme Cahuzac, who was the budget minister responsible for tax, turned out to have a secret Swiss bank account with 600,000 euros in it. And he initially denied this and said he was going to clear his name. And he was dismissed anyway by François Hollande. And then he subsequently admitted it was all true. And he did, in fact, have this bank account. And that immediately led to speculation that other senior officials might also be squirreling away money in Swiss bank accounts and elsewhere, just at a time where Mr. Hollande's government is trying to push through this very controversial 75% tax rate on the rich. And so this is a case of French politicians saying one thing and doing another. And the odd thing is that this is something that has been tolerated for a very long time in France. It has this great tradition of allowing politicians and other public figures a far higher degree of privacy and secrecy than in any other country. In fact, according to Transparency International, France and Slovenia have the lowest transparency standards for elected officials anywhere in Europe, and probably the most famous example of the sort of secrecy that goes on would be François Mitterrand's secret daughter, and the fact that he had cancer, and both of these things were kept quiet for years and years and years. And this would be, I think, unthinkable in other Western democracies. So what's now happened is, as a result of this scandal, is that much stricter rules requiring French politicians not just to provide a rather minimalist list of their interests, but to provide very detailed accounts of their actual holdings has been introduced. And this actually goes further than what politicians in, say, Britain are required to do. And as a result, there's been absolute outrage from many French politicians who don't want to reveal this sort of thing, think it's voyeuristic, think it's grotesque. And so there's going to be lots of kicking and screaming. But what Mr. Hollande has said is if they don't say all of this by the deadline, then he will introduce new laws to make them do it.
Presumably, Tom, for President Hollande, this is an effort to get all the bad stuff out there and to move on, because his popularity is at a record low for a president at this stage in his administration.
Yes, it's astonishing. He's down, his popularity rating is down a record low of 26%. And he campaigned on the basis that he would have an exemplary government. He would move on from the flash and the glitz of the Sarkozy years, and he would do things like cut unemployment, and there would be an end to austerity, and he would pay for this by slapping this 75% tax on the rich. That tax has been held up in the courts. It turns out that actually cutting unemployment and ending austerity are much easier said than done, so he's had to go and do quite the opposite, which is reform welfare rules and pension rules, and all that has led to this massive unpopularity. So for all this to be happening and to be saying you're going to clean things up, and then to have officials hiding money away and doing the exact opposite of the policies that they're supposed to be implementing is extremely embarrassing. So I imagine his hope is that by imposing this deadline, he's trying to get all the bad news, all the embarrassing revelations out of the way so that he can start rebuilding his trust with the people and rebuilding his popularity. Well, turning now to Venezuela, Daniel, the death of Hugo Chavez means that they now need a new president, and so they're having this presidential election. Before his death, Chavez made it very clear who he wanted to succeed him. So is this going to be a shoo-in for his chosen successor?
Well, he's the strong favourite, Nicolas Maduro, who is the acting president. He was the long-serving foreign minister under Hugo Chavez. He has a double-digit lead over his main rival, Enrique Capriles, who's the governor of Miranda State, which includes most of Caracas. And as you would expect, the memory of Hugo Chavez, the near deification of the former president, is Mr. Maduro's main campaigning theme. Chavez is everywhere. He is almost referred to as a saint, and this makes it very hard for the opposition to gain traction. After all, there was an 11-point gap in the last election only a few months ago. So it does look as if it will be Mr. Maduro.
And assuming it is, what can we expect from him? Will there be a straightforward continuation of the Chavez policies, or can we expect a change of direction?
Well, his problem is twofold. First of all, that he is actually not Chavez. He lacks his charisma. He has people around him who are accused by the opposition of being corrupt. And secondly, the dire state of the economy, which is the one reason that gives really the opposition, Mr. Capriles, hope of a surprise victory, because inflation is very high, there are shortages of all sorts, power cuts, and there is a sense that Venezuela badly needs to find a new course. That is precisely what Mr. Maduro is not offering. He's offering more of the same, a continuation of Chavismo. Finally, to Amsterdam, where one of Europe's great museums, the Rijksmuseum, is reopening after a decade of refurbishment.
Yes, the Rijksmuseum will be reopened next week by Queen Beatrix, who will, it'll actually be her last official engagement before her abdication. And it's been a very long process. It's been a decade. The process began in 2003, and they thought it would just take 3 years. And it's been held up by pretty much everything that could go wrong going wrong. So the contractor went bust, the planning was bungled, asbestos was found, but probably the biggest thing was that there's actually a bike lane in an arcade that runs through the middle of the museum. It's on the ground floor, so what you used to have to do to get from one side of the ground floor to the other was go via the first floor, or the second floor, as people would say in the United States. And as a result of this, the original plan was to get rid of this bike lane through the middle. And the very strong bike lobby in Amsterdam fought against this and ultimately prevailed. And as a result, the design had to be completely changed. And the result is this very large atrium actually underneath the museum, which connects all the different parts of it. So it's rather like what happened in the Louvre with the glass pyramid, where a new atrium was built underground that connects other bits, or what happened with the Great Court in the British Museum, where a previously unused space in the middle of the museum was actually used as a new concourse, and it makes it much easier to get from one bit of the museum to another. So essentially this is the Rijksmuseum's version of that, but it has taken much longer and much more money than everyone expected.
Well, that's the framework. What about the art? Will it all be familiar and in the same place?
Well, actually, the only thing that's in the same place after this renovation as it was in the beginning is the Night Watch by Rembrandt, the single most famous work in the museum, if not in the whole country. And it's going to be rather easier to get to. Under the previous layout, you were forced to walk through the entire history of Dutch painting before you were allowed to look at the Night Watch. In fact, there was a fence inside the museum to stop you going straight to it. So it is now, in pride of place, much easier to see, much easier to get to, and will undoubtedly be the main attraction, just as the Mona Lisa is in the Louvre. That said, it's also the sort of spiritual centre of the museum, and it was recreated by a flash mob in a shopping mall recently, and this is a video that has been put up to promote the reopening of the Rijksmuseum. So people dressed in 17th century garb chased they were being the members of the Night Watch, and they chased a miscreant also dressed in such garb through this shopping mall, and then everyone sort of artfully arranges themselves into the tableau, and a frame drops down in front of them to make the perfect copy of the painting. So it's very jolly. But that shows you that the Night's Watch is both physically and sort of spiritually the centre of the museum.
Well, that's our frame around events for next week. If you have any comments or feedback, please visit our news blog at economist.com/blogs/newsbook, and join us again next week for another look at the week ahead. From London, this is The Economist.